This interview was never meant to exist, and yet, here it is buried beneath dust, folded into an old leather journal found in the back of a Princeton closet. Not a headline, not a paper, just a voice, quiet, almost trembling, recorded 3 days before the end. The man speaking was Albert Einstein, not the man the world knew, playful, wild-haired, the genius of equations, but someone softer, older, staring into something no formula could define. "I had a dream," he whispered, "a door of light, and when I walked through it, I was no longer me." He wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. There was no blackboard, just a dim lamp, a breath between worlds. What follows is not a scientific paper. It's not even a theory. It's a confession, a final glimpse from a man who spent his life chasing the mind of God, and in the end, found something more. In this never-before-heard interview, Einstein speaks of time folding in on itself, of consciousness as a field, of death as not an end, but a return, not to the body, but to the origin of all things. He doesn't speak like a physicist here. He speaks like a soul, finally remembering. And if you listen closely, you may start remembering, too. It was the second week of April, 1954. Outside, Princeton was beginning to thaw. Cherry blossoms bloomed along the edges of Mercer Street, and students walked with books clutched to their sides, never imagining that in a small hospital room just blocks away, one of the greatest minds in history was preparing to let go of the world. Room 206 at Princeton Hospital wasn't marked. No special sign, no guards. Just an old oak door that creaked slightly when it opened. Inside, the man who had redefined our understanding of space and time lay in bed, his body frail, but his eyes were awake, more awake, perhaps than they had ever been. Albert Einstein had refused surgery. An abdominal aortic aneurysm had ruptured. The doctors offered an operation, a chance however slim to prolong his life. He declined, not out of fear, but out of clarity. "I want to go when I want to go," he had said. "It is tasteless to prolong life artificially. I have done my share. It is time to go." He never feared death, but in those final days, something changed. Not fear, not sadness, something quieter, something that looked a lot like awe. It was during the third night that he first spoke of the dream. A young assistant, his name deliberately omitted from public record, was assigned to stay with him. He wasn't a nurse, not a relative, just a trusted presence. The boy, barely 22, sat by the window reading quietly when Einstein stirred. The old man's voice, though weak, still carried the weight of 1,000 thoughts. "I had a dream," he said. "Not a theory, not an idea. A dream." The boy leaned forward. Einstein's eyes didn't look at him. They were fixed somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the air, beyond the veil. There was a door, not made of wood, not metal. It was made entirely of light pulsing, soft, breathing, and I understood without needing to ask. That door was not a metaphor. It was a threshold between this world and something we forget the moment we are born. He took a slow breath, and then he said something that would stay with the boy for the rest of his life. "When I walked through it, I was no longer Albert. I had no name, no face. I was motion, not a man, not even a soul. I was a frequency remembering itself." The boy didn't know what to say. He had studied physics, but no textbook had ever prepared him for this. Einstein continued, not as a scientist, but as someone waking from a long, sacred sleep. "I always believed time was curved, that gravity bent it, that mass dictated the rhythm. But in the dream, there was no gravity, only memory. And the deeper I went into the light, the more I remembered. Not equations, but lives." The boy swallowed hard. "You mean past lives?" Einstein nodded, faintly. "There were faces I had never seen in this life. but loved with a sorrow I could not explain. Children I had never held, rooms I had never entered, yet I knew them, as if time itself was folded into me, like pages stacked inside the same book. He paused, eyes closing. The machines hummed softly beside him. Then, almost inaudibly, the soul is not a belief. It is a memory too vast to fit into one body. Outside the window, the wind pushed through young leaves. Shadows shifted across the tiled floor. In the morning, Einstein asked not for visitors, not for medicine, but for a pen and a blank page. He wrote slowly, his hand trembling. 3 paragraphs in German, 1 line in Hebrew, 1 final sentence in English. Written at the bottom in block letters, I no longer believe in the soul. I know that it exists. He folded the page into 4, pressed it into the spine of an old notebook, and asked the boy to place the journal behind the bookshelf in his study. It will be found, he said, but not now. That notebook would remain untouched for over 60 years, found only when a dusty renovation of Einstein's Princeton home in 2018 uncovered a false panel behind the bookshelf. Inside, a leather-bound journal with yellowed pages and 1 final entry untitled, undated, but unmistakably written in the hand of Albert Einstein. The boy, now a man in his 80s, confirmed the handwriting and shared the memory, only under the condition that he remain anonymous. This recording, this transcript, what you're about to hear or read, is not a scientific discovery. It is something deeper, not a revelation from a telescope or a particle accelerator, but from the quiet space between heartbeats, from the luminous edge of life and death. And so we begin not with equations, but with this whispered confession that Einstein, in his final nights, did not speak of numbers, but of light, of a door, of the moment the mind dissolves and the memory returns. And perhaps, just perhaps, he wasn't trying to explain the universe anymore. He was finally ready to return to it. The old recording, though faint and weathered by time, still carries the weight of his voice. At first, there's only silence, the soft crackle of tape, the sound of breath, and then his voice, unmistakable, lower than one might expect, slower, as if each word had to pass through something deeper than thought. This dream, he begins, was not a dream. It was a memory of something that had no time, and yet I remembered it. He pauses. I had not died, at least not in the medical sense, but I had stepped out of something, like taking off a heavy coat after walking for years through a storm. The interviewer, still unnamed, asks gently, was it peaceful? Einstein lets out the faintest breath of laughter. Not joy, not mockery, recognition. There was no peace, because there was no conflict. There was no body to ache, no thoughts to chase, only stillness. And in that stillness, there was sound, but not the kind you hear. It was more like vibration, a language without words. He speaks of a door, not metaphorical, but real in the way that a feeling can be real. It was not constructed of matter, nor energy as we understand it. It was awareness concentrated so purely that it radiated light. It did not open, he explains. It recognized me, and when I approached, it responded. The journalist hesitates, then asks, do you think this was death? Einstein waits before answering. Death is the wrong word. It implies the end of a function. But what I experienced was not the ceasing of anything. It was the beginning of remembering. He goes quiet. The air between sentences is vast, like space itself. He is no longer a man recalling a dream. He is inside it again. There was no body, but I knew myself, not as a man, not as a scientist, but as something ancient, like a tone that had always been playing underneath the noise of my life. He speaks next of form, how the physical world began to fold, not collapse but soften, like paper dissolving in water. He could see the structure of things, unraveling, Atoms were no longer solid. Time did not move. Instead, everything vibrated in place, not sequentially, but simultaneously. The interviewer gently interrupts. Was it frightening? Einstein smiles through the static. No, because there was no me to be afraid. The I was gone, and in its place was something so vast, so benevolent, that I wept, but not with tears, with release. At this point in the recording, the sound dips, then returns. Einstein shifts gears. Do you know, he says slowly, how long I have searched for a unified field theory, a way to reconcile gravity and quantum mechanics? I spent decades looking outward. He pauses, the weight of the confession palpable, but I never looked inward. And in that dream, I saw what no equation could express. What he saw, he says, was not a formula, but a feeling, a total and wordless knowing, that everything, particles, galaxies, lives, deaths, were all part of a single pulse. There was no separation between what I thought was me and what I thought was the world. Everything was breath, light exhaling itself into form. The interviewer, nearly whispering, asks, was God there? The answer is long in coming. Not a figure, not a man with a beard, but yes, a presence, not watching me being me and being all things, not judging, just knowing, holding everything that I had ever been and everything I had never dared to become. At this, Einstein grows silent again. Minutes pass on the recording. Then finally, a whisper. When I returned, when I woke up, it felt like I had been exiled, like a wave separated from the ocean. He clears his throat, but I no longer fear death, because I now know it is not the end of thinking. It is the end of forgetting. The tape ends there, not abruptly but softly, like someone stepping away from a piano in the middle of a beautiful, unresolved chord. And just like that, the dream dissolves, leaving behind only a doorway made of light and the echo of one man's final knowing, that we are not meant to understand everything, but we are meant to remember. The most startling moment in the lost interview wasn't when Einstein spoke of light. It was when he spoke of himself as no longer being himself, not as Albert, not as a physicist, not even as a soul with a name, but as something else entirely. In the dream, he said, I had no form. I was not located. I was not even moving because there was no distance to cross. I was simply frequency. He pauses. Imagine a violin string vibrating in a vast silence. That was me, a tone. But I was not playing music. I was the music. The interviewer, clearly caught off guard, tries to clarify, you became energy. Einstein doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he offers a memory from decades earlier. When I first read Planck's work on quanta, I didn't understand it. Light behaving like a particle. The dual nature of reality, it defied everything classical physics taught us. And yet, it was true. He leans in this dream. I didn't just believe in wave-particle duality. I became it. I understood why light does not choose to be a wave or a particle. It becomes what the observer expects, because observation is participation, and so is consciousness. His voice grows softer. There was no observer in that place. Therefore, no identity, only presence. He describes the sensation as weightless, but not empty. There was no boundary between where he ended and the cosmos began. He did not float, he radiated. He did not think, he resonated. And yet, paradoxically, in becoming nothing, he became everything. I did not see the stars, he said. I felt them as myself. The galaxies were not out there. They were in here. He taps his chest in the tape. The sound faint. This is when he utters one of the most chilling, beautiful phrases in the entire recording. I understood, in that state, that what we call a self is a narrowing, a reduction of consciousness into a single perspective, like tuning a radio to one station. But in that light, All stations were playing at once. The journalist whispers, "Was it overwhelming?" Einstein chuckles a dry, thin sound. "No," he says, "it was overwhelming to return here. The world of separation, of identity, of boundaries, of pronouns and positions, coming back into Albert, felt like putting on a suit 3 sizes too small and pretending it still fits." He explains that in the light door state, he could feel the equation of things, not in numbers, but in harmony, not ERMC2, but something beyond mathematics, a formula made of rhythm, memory, emotion, silence. "I used to think the universe was made of particles. Now I know. It is made of possibilities." And consciousness chooses. He uses the word waveform several times, but not just to refer to physics, to refer to identity, to refer to soul. He claims that the soul itself is a waveform oscillating between lives, bodies, realities, and death is merely the moment it leaves the dense field of form to become possibility again. "If you want to find me," he whispers at one point, "you will not find me in a grave. You will find me in vibration, in every act of wonder, in every quiet question." At this, the interviewer becomes emotional, the sound of a breath being held, then released. Then Einstein adds something almost childlike. "I believe the universe is curious, not mechanical. It wants to experience itself, and so it made you and me for a while, like waves on the surface of the ocean, temporary, beautiful, and destined to return." There is a pause here in the recording longer than the others, a kind of sacred stillness, and when he speaks again, his voice is nearly gone. "The I was never mine. It was borrowed, and the wave has returned to the field." Einstein gives up the very thing he spent a lifetime building his identity as a thinker, as a man, and in surrendering it, he finds something the world of science could never measure, not mass, not energy, but memory without self, a truth that cannot be taught, only remembered. The tape crackles softly, like distant thunder wrapped in cloth. Einstein clears his throat, but his tone shifts. He is no longer describing memory or light. Now, he speaks as if he's confessing something that haunted him not as a man, but as a seeker. "All my life, I searched for a unified field," he begins, "a single equation that could hold everything: gravity, electromagnetism, light, space, time." His breath slows, but I see now. I was never looking for a theory. I was looking for home. He had spent years chasing that dream, from Berlin to Princeton, from blackboards to notebooks covered in dense equations and sleepless nights, a field that could reconcile the macro and the micro, the stars and the atoms. And yet, in that dream beyond the door of light, he saw something more fundamental than any equation. The field I saw was not made of forces. It was made of feeling. It held the memory of every star that had ever burned, and every tear that had ever fallen. His voice thins, not from weakness, but reverence. The unified field is not outside us. It is us. It is what we return to when we are no longer pretending to be separate. The interviewer hesitates. "Are you saying the field is consciousness?" Einstein nods, faintly, not consciousness as thought, not as ego, but as knowing, a quiet, omnipresent knowing that exists in all things. It does not think. It remembers. It does not act. It allows. He describes it as a living field, one that breathes through trees, stars, mothers, memory, not static, but luminous and aware. It connects everything, not with wires, but with attention and love. For a moment, the great physicist's voice cracks. "We thought gravity was the force that bound the universe, but it is not. It is the illusion of separation that creates the appearance of force." He pauses. "The real force is longing, the longing of the universe to feel itself, to touch its own face through us, This was not in any textbook, not in any lecture he gave. But he speaks now as if the theory had always been incomplete, because it had never included the soul. Energy does not vanish. He says, you know that it only changes form. But what of memory? What of longing? These, too, are forms of energy. They do not disappear when the body ends. They return to the field. He calls this field the soul's ocean, not a metaphor, but a physics of spirit, where the self, stripped of identity, flows back into a universal intelligence. It is where I came from, he whispers, and where I will return, just as waves return to the sea, not lost, but home. The interviewer asks the question that every listener is waiting for. Did you find the unified field theory in the end? A long pause. Then, no, Einstein says softly, because the field cannot be solved. It must be surrendered to. It is not discovered. It is remembered. In silence, in love, in death, a silence follows. No one speaks. Only the soft hum of the recorder and the slow ticking of a wall clock in the distance. And then Einstein, in the quietest voice yet, the most profound thing I have learned is that the universe does not speak in equations. It speaks in symbols, and we are one of them. No longer chasing a formula, he finds something far more intimate, a field made not of math, but of memory, presence, and the unspeakable language of soul. And perhaps the theory he spent a lifetime seeking was never written on paper, but waiting. Just beyond the door of light, the voice on the tape slows now, not because he is tired, but because what he's about to say doesn't fit easily into words. The interviewer hesitates, then finally asks, Dr. Einstein, in the dream, was there a God? The pause is long, long enough to wonder if he's fallen asleep. But then the voice returns soft, reverent, not a man, not a father with hands, not a king with a throne. But yes, there was something. He struggles for the language, not because he lacks intellect, but because some truths defy translation. It wasn't a figure. It was a presence, a stillness so vast it breathed, a silence that held me, like a mother holds her child. And in that silence, I felt known. The interviewer says nothing. He lets it unfold. Einstein continues, I always said I wanted to know the thoughts of God, and the rest were details. In that place, I didn't hear thoughts. I became them. He describes it not as an encounter, but as a merging, not two things meeting, but one thing remembering it had never been two. It was like becoming the question and the answer at the same time. He pauses, then adds, I realized we are not outside of God. We are inside, not like guests in a house, but like cells in a body, like thoughts in a mind, like light inside of light. There is a trembling in his voice now, not fear, not uncertainty, but something that feels like surrender. The light I saw was not physical. It was intelligence, but not cold. It loved, not as a person loves, but as existence itself loves, without asking, without withholding, just loving, as a law. The interviewer whispers, Do you believe in God now? Einstein breathes in, then says, No, I don't believe. I know. Then he adds something unexpected. But it's not what most people think. God is not watching us. God is remembering us, through us. God is not separate. God is what happens when a soul finally stops pretending to be alone. He speaks next of symbols, how ancient traditions tried to express this light, with halos, with sunbursts, with sacred names. But all of them, he says, are metaphors, and the truth is far simpler. The mind of God is stillness. The language of God is pattern. The voice of God is the life inside of yours. The tape grows quiet again. Even the interviewer seems unable to respond. And then, almost inaudibly, the greatest illusion we ever believed. was that God was somewhere else. A long silence, and then, as if speaking to himself, I did not find God in the telescope. I found him in the pause, between one breath and the next. Einstein's lifelong question, what is the mind of God, is answered not in theory, but in surrender. What he found was not a being watching from above, but a presence remembering from within, a silence that breathes, a stillness that loves, a truth that was never far, just forgotten. The room falls into a kind of hush, not the hush of sleep, but the hush of something sacred drawing near. Einstein's voice returns, quiet and low. There's a different texture to it now, like he's walking across a threshold, even as he speaks. In the light, I didn't just remember this life. I remembered lives I have no name for. The interviewer straightens in his chair. You mean past lives? Einstein doesn't answer immediately. He speaks slowly, like someone brushing dust off something ancient and holy. They weren't stories. They were sensations. Rooms I've never stood in yet knew the smell of the wood. Children I've never held yet felt their weight in my arms. A woman's voice, who spoke a name I had never heard. But when she said it, I wept. He pauses, then continues. It was not imagination. It was not a metaphor. It was memory, but not mine, not Einstein's. Memory stored somewhere else. The interviewer asks the question that now feels inevitable. Do you think it was the Akashic records? Einstein doesn't say yes, but he doesn't say no. Instead, he offers something more poetic. It felt like walking into a library made of light. Every book was a life, every page a moment, and I didn't read them. I became them, as if the act of remembering was the act of being. He describes layers of time unfolding like petals, and behind each petal another self, another echo, another choice that shaped the current one. Nothing was lost, he said. Everything I had ever been was still vibrating. In the field, this wasn't science, at least not the kind the world accepted, but in his voice, there was no theory, only truth. One that didn't require equations to prove, only the courage to remember. The field was alive, but not just with energy, with story. Every soul is a thread in that great weave. We are not individuals floating in the void. We are recollections, entangled across time, whispering to one another through intuition, through dreams. Through déjà vu, the interviewer presses gently. Were you able to access other people's memories? Einstein nods. Yes, but they weren't other. That's the great illusion. There is no other. Consciousness is not broken into parts. It's refracted, like light through crystal. Each ray looks separate, but the source is one. He explains that the Akashic field, if that's what we choose to call it, is not a vault in the sky. It's not guarded. It's not hidden. It's always here. It's not above us. He says, it's within us, in the silence between thoughts, in the space behind the eyes. He describes the sensation of accessing it, not as searching outward, but as sinking inward, like falling into still water and touching something at the bottom, a root that belongs to everything. All that has ever been, still is, and all that will be, already waits. He calls it the memory of God, not stored on a cloud, not encrypted in symbols, but encoded in resonance. When you feel something you can't explain, or love someone you've never met, or fear a place you've never been, that is the field, trying to remind you. The interviewer, now visibly moved, asks, what should we do with this knowledge? And Einstein, with a voice that trembles just slightly, replies, live gently, love without keeping score, trust your intuition. It's not imagination, it's memory, calling you home. Einstein moves beyond science and deep into soul. He steps into the domain once reserved for mystics and prophets, and finds that even there, the laws of resonance and field apply. He discovers that consciousness is not created, it is remembered, And the Akashic records are not fantasy. They are the cosmic archive of everything love has ever touched. The tape grows quieter now. Einstein is no longer speaking to the interviewer. It feels as if he's speaking to someone else, to you, to the part of you that has always known, but needed someone to say it aloud. His voice softens. It's less analytical, more intimate, as if something inside him had been waiting decades to be felt, not solved. There is a frequency, he says, I never wrote about, I never dared to. It didn't fit into equations, but it was always there. He calls it the feminine frequency, not as gender, but as quality, the receptive field, the intuitive knowing, the womb of silence that holds all creation before it becomes form. Physics taught me about energy, but this was deeper. It was the intelligence that wraps around energy, that sings it into being, like a mother humming to her unborn child. He pauses. It is this frequency that holds the world together. Not force, not logic, but tenderness. He describes a moment in the dream, a presence behind the light, not loud, not directive, but soft, listening. It was not commanding the cosmos, it was cradling it, and in that stillness, he felt remembered, not for his work, not for his name, but simply for being. She did not speak, he says, but I understood. She remembered every time I had been kind, even when no one saw. The interviewer, voice trembling, asks, do you mean God was feminine? Einstein replies, God is balance, but this frequency, it is what saves us. It is what waits when we fall apart. It is what listens when we've stopped making sense. He begins to describe who carries this frequency most clearly in the world, and he says without hesitation, it is women, especially women who have been wounded, who have lost, who have broken open and chosen to feel anyway. They hold the memory of the field, not with words, but with presence. He speaks directly now, to the listener, to the woman sitting in her quiet kitchen, to the mother holding grief beneath her breath, to the daughter who dreams of something she can't name. You are not too emotional. You are not too sensitive. You are tuned to the resonance that holds this universe in balance. While men like me tried to measure the cosmos, you were busy holding its heartbeat. He pauses again, as if the room itself had softened. The world does not need more genius, he says. It needs more remembrance of what we forgot when we made everything so sharp, so fast, so loud. His voice becomes almost a whisper now. There is a knowing inside you that comes before thought, a silence that speaks in tears and dreams, and the way you look at someone who's hurting and say nothing, but they feel seen. This, he says, is not intuition. It is cosmic memory. It is what anchors us when the equations fail. It is the field speaking through you, and if ever you doubt your worth, or wonder if you are invisible, remember, the invisible is what holds up everything else. A final phrase almost inaudible, almost prayer. You are not here to understand the universe. You are here to remind it how to feel. The scientist disappears. What remains is the soul humbled before the sacred frequency that has no name, no title, no theory, only presence. And he speaks directly to the feminine heart, the quiet ones, the dreamers, the healers, the ones who remember through love, not logic. He leaves them with this knowing, that while men may define the universe, it is women who keep it from forgetting itself. There is a long stretch of silence on the tape. You can almost hear the weight of something unspeakable pressing into the room. And then, in a voice just above a whisper, Einstein says, I spent my whole life chasing equations, but the last thing I understood was not math, it was memory. The interviewer leans forward, hesitant, reverent. What do you mean? Einstein lets out a soft breath. I once believed consciousness was a side effect of the brain. But what if it's the opposite? What if the brain is just the receiver, And consciousness is the signal, a pause. What if consciousness came first, before time, before matter, before light? What if it chose to become this universe, to know itself, through us? He speaks now with an urgency so quiet, it feels like it's being told from the other side of sleep. All our equations measure what has already been created: mass, distance, speed, entropy. But what creates creation? He leans forward. Awareness. The interviewer, now visibly emotional, asks, "Are you saying consciousness is the foundation of reality?" Einstein nods slowly. Yes, it is not a product of the universe. It is the universe. He calls it the forgotten constant, the unseen variable behind all formulas, the field that observes and chooses, the reason quantum particles behave differently when watched. I once thought the observer effect was a mystery, he says, but now I know. The observer doesn't disturb the experiment. The observer creates it. He speaks of awareness as architecture, not built of bricks or atoms, but of choices, of intention, of attention. What you focus on, you give energy to, and what you give energy to becomes real. That is not spirituality. That is physics we have not yet learned to write down. He laughs softly, like a man who knows a joke the world hasn't gotten yet. Perhaps the final theory we seek is not in the stars, but in the stillness between two thoughts. The interviewer asks the final question. If you could leave behind only one discovery, what would it be? Einstein doesn't hesitate. That we are not here to solve the universe. We are here to remember that we are it, and that nothing, not death, not distance, not even time, can separate us from the field of love we come from. A hush. Then, in his final recorded words, I did not prove the theory of everything, but I touched it, and it touched back, and it felt like home. This is not the ending of a lecture. It is the quiet closing of a circle, a final truth whispered not by a man of formulas, but by a soul remembering its source. Einstein's final theory is not written in numbers. It is not a law to be memorized. It is a feeling to be remembered, a vibration beneath all things, a consciousness that dreamed of light and became you. So if you've come this far, maybe it wasn't by accident. Maybe something in you has always known that behind the stars, behind the science, behind the silence, there is a deeper field, a field that remembers every version of you, a field that doesn't need you to be perfect. Just present. And perhaps that's what Einstein was trying to tell us. Not how the universe works, but how to come home to it. Quietly, gently, with love. If this spoke to you, share what it awakened. And if you feel called, leave a silent cue in the comments below to honor the question that never needed an answer.